a currency that runs the world. For decades, the global economy has revolved around a single currency, the United States dollar. It powers international trade, dominates energy markets, and forms the backbone of global banking. From oil shipments crossing oceans to technology components moving through international supply chains, a large portion of the world's economic activity flows through a financial system built around the dollar. Nearly every major international transaction eventually touches the dollar-based banking network. But something unusual is beginning to happen. A group of powerful economies is slowly exploring ways to challenge this system. An alliance that includes some of the world's fastest-growing markets, some of the largest energy producers, and nearly half of the world's population. This alliance is known as BRICS, and its expansion could reshape the balance of global economic power. The origins of BRICS. The story of BRICS begins in the early 2000s. At that time, several rapidly developing economies were starting to gain influence in global markets. These countries were Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Later, South Africa joined the group. Together, they formed a new economic partnership known as BRICS. At first glance, these countries had very little in common. Different cultures, different political systems, different geopolitical interests. But they shared one important perspective. They believed the global economic system was dominated too heavily by Western institutions. Organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank had long played central roles in global finance. Yet many emerging economies believed their influence within these institutions was limited. BRICS was created as a platform where large developing economies could coordinate policies and increase their collective voice. In the early years, the partnership was mostly symbolic: annual meetings, economic dialogues, diplomatic cooperation. But gradually, the partnership began building institutions of its own. Building an alternative system. One of the most important steps was the creation of the new development bank. This financial institution was designed to fund infrastructure and development projects across emerging economies. Its mission was straightforward: provide financing for roads, railways, ports, and energy projects without relying entirely on Western-dominated institutions. For developing countries, infrastructure investment is often the foundation of economic growth. Access to financing can determine whether projects move forward or remain unfinished. The new development bank offered an alternative source of funding. At first, its global influence remained limited. But global politics and economics were evolving. Major powers were competing more intensely. Trade tensions were rising, and the structure of the global economy was slowly shifting. Understanding the dollar system. To understand why BRICS expansion matters, we first need to understand how the current financial system works. Since the end of World War II, the United States dollar has been the dominant global currency. Countries trade commodities in dollars. International loans are often issued in dollars, and central banks around the world hold large reserves of dollars to stabilize their economies. This system provides significant advantages to the United States. When the global economy relies on your currency, you gain powerful influence over international finance. One of the key pillars of this system is something known as the petrodollar system. Since the 1970s, most oil around the world has been traded using dollars. This means countries that want to purchase energy must first acquire dollars. And because energy fuels modern economies, the dollar became deeply embedded in global trade. Why some countries want alternatives. However,
Not every country is comfortable with this arrangement. Some governments believe the dollar's dominance gives United States enormous financial leverage. Through dollar-based systems, Washington can impose economic sanctions, restrict banking access, and limit financial transactions. For countries that find themselves on the receiving end of these policies, dependence on the dollar can become a strategic vulnerability. As a result, some nations have started exploring ways to reduce their reliance on dollar-based financial networks. This is where BRICS begins to take on a more significant role. The expansion. For many years, BRICS remained a relatively small alliance, but that changed dramatically in recent years. In 2024, the group announced a historic expansion. Several new countries were invited to join the alliance, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Ethiopia. This expansion significantly increased the alliance's economic reach. But more importantly, it brought major energy producers into the organization. Energy is one of the most powerful forces shaping the global economy. Countries that control large oil and gas reserves often hold substantial geopolitical influence. With these new members, BRICS suddenly gained stronger representation within global energy markets. This raised an important question. Could this alliance eventually create a financial system capable of competing with the existing dollar-dominated system? A gradual shift in trade. Some BRICS countries have already begun experimenting with alternative trade arrangements. Instead of settling transactions in dollars, they are increasingly exploring the use of national currencies. China has expanded trade using the Chinese yuan. Russia has promoted transactions using the Russian ruble. India has experimented with trade agreements based on the Indian rupee. For now, these experiments represent only a small portion of global trade. The dollar still dominates the financial system. But economic systems rarely change overnight. They evolve gradually. If more countries begin settling trade outside the dollar system, the global financial landscape could slowly transform. A multipolar economic future. The expansion of BRICS may represent something larger than a simple economic alliance. It may signal the emergence of a more multipolar global economy. For much of the late 20th century and early 21st century, global finance was largely centered around Western institutions and the US dollar. But as emerging economies continue to grow, new alliances may begin shaping alternative economic networks. Instead of one dominant financial system, the future could involve multiple centers of economic influence, different currencies, different financial institutions, different trade networks. Such transformations take time, sometimes decades. But history shows that global power structures eventually evolve, and the expansion of BRICS could be one early signal of that shift. Final reflection. A changing financial world. BRICS expansion is not simply about adding new countries to an economic alliance. It is about creating new pathways within the global system, new financial institutions, new economic partnerships, and potentially new rules for how global trade operates. Whether BRICS will ultimately succeed in challenging the existing financial order remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: the balance of economic power in the world is changing, and the alliances forming today may shape the global economy for decades to come. Because in the world of geopolitics, power is not only measured in armies or territory. Sometimes it is measured in currencies.